Since its launch in 2014, the Destiny franchise has evolved and changed quite a bit, sometimes for the better, but also a lot of times for the worse. Ren's Reviews here has made a video called How Bungie Ruined Their Destiny, and I'm really interested to comment and react to this because I wonder what types of conclusions he might be drawing here. The game has actually been in a pretty good spot recently, so I wonder if he's talking about some of the old stuff, or maybe he just doesn't like the new stuff. But either way, I'm really interested to see his takes and see if I agree with them or perhaps disagree with them. So without further ado, let's jump right in with the beginning of the video.
From the very beginning, I loved Destiny. It had some of the best visuals, the best music, and the best feeling shooting in the FPS space. That alone should have been enough. But on top of that, it had this fascinating, mystical galaxy that was positively oozing with atmosphere. It was a world that I wanted to keep coming back to.
The number one priority was to make a world that people wanted to be in.
It's hard to remember this now, but in the beginning, Destiny really was something special. I mean, there was nothing else like it, not even close. It was the first ever shared world shooter, built from the ground up to be addictive, and it sank its hooks into me pretty deeply. I have so many fond memories in this game. I did everything you could possibly do. I played it non-stop each new day. The synergy between PvE and PvP was a big draw for me. I spent hours grinding out strange coins, legendary marks, and exotics that I could take into the Crucible, which was where I spent the bulk of my time. But I was still a big fan of the PvE. I would often solo the Nightfalls or carry my lower leveled friends through them since I had all the best guns. And I had all the best guns because I played the raid every single week on multiple characters. I've seen a lot of people talalic about how Dark Souls helped them with their depression and things like that. And that's what Destiny did for me. It was there for me at a time in my life when I had almost nothing. It dunked on my depression. See, when your life is in shambles, when can I even get out of bed is today's question, Destiny is tomorrow's answer. When I started this channel, I had actually intended for it to be a Destiny channel. I made videos about the state of the Crucible, I made reactions to gameplay reveals, I made a Crucible montage. I was all in. In fact, I've made 16 Destiny videos on this very channel, 17 if you count this one. So seeing the direction that Destiny has taken over the past 7 years makes me genuinely sad.
I'm really interested if he's going to start talking about monetization things, because those issues have kind of been addressed. And also, it seems so far like he preferred Destiny 1, but maybe that's just my interpretation of what he's saying. Maybe actually that changes later in the video, but let's continue.
Nowadays, when people ask me if they should get into Destiny, I give them some super good advice and tell them to steer clear.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a sad reality. A lot of people no longer recommend this game to their friends simply because of the way that the new player / returning player experience is, which is quite unfortunate.
And so, with the final shape looming on the horizon, which I will be reviewing by the way, I figured that now would be the best time to take a look at Destiny's history and show you how slowly but surely Bungie was able to push Destiny veterans like me away from their game. This is how Bungie ruined their Destiny.
It's interesting how he's kind of coming at this from the perspective of a veteran player. Like in this case, he's talking about how he and people like him are being pushed away from the game as people who have played it for a really long time, which is kind of the opposite of what I was just thinking earlier about how he was referring to new players joining the game and not being very engaged in the very beginning. But yeah, it's interesting. I think there have been some times where the game was better geared towards more casual players rather than the super dedicated players, and maybe that's kind of what he's getting at here.
Now, before we get into Destiny's downfall, I think it's important to go over its rise of Iron and everything that came before it, such as the Dark Below. I didn't buy the Dark Below right away, because at the time the Dark Below was considered to be a very lackluster expansion with very little content. It had 3 new story missions, 3 multiplayer maps, 3 exotic weapons, 2 strikes, and a raid. Now looking back on it, that's actually a pretty substantial DLC when you compare it to what we get out of Destiny 2's seasonal model today, where we get 1 or 2 new missions, a new seasonal activity, and a handful of new weapons. But when I finally did scrounge up enough spare change together to buy Dark Below for myself, I actually thought it wasn't too bad. Omnighoul was a pretty cool strike, and that first encounter in the Crota raid where you run from one lantern to the next through the darkness was awesome. few months later, we got the House of Wolves expansion, which was once again considered to be pretty underwhelming by the gaming community at large. It came with 6 new story missions, 4 exotics, the Reef, the Prison of Elders, Trials of Osiris, and it introduced sidearms. Back then,
You know what's kind of crazy? It was considered to be underwhelming, and people were freaking out that there was not a new raid, and yet it introduced Trials of Osiris. Like, imagine if a season today, because that's the comparison he's making here. He's comparing these expansions to seasons. Imagine if a season today, or even an episode, introduced Trials of Osiris. Trials is just such a monumental activity that is like a staple of this franchise. So the fact that House of Wolves introduced Trials, that's like a colossal contribution all by itself.
and the sentiment was that House of Wolves didn't have enough content, but when compared to what we get today when a new season drops in Destiny 2, not only is this objectively far more content, but it's also far more substantive. The Prison of Elders alone offered up a bunch of different arenas, every enemy type in the game was there, different bosses, and different modifiers.
Dude, I miss the Prison of Elders. There's so many iconic Prison of Elders lines where the bosses are
Texas, the betrayed.
Whereas now, after playing a seasonal activity just once, it has almost nothing to offer you in terms of gameplay each time you revisit that activity. Now,
Yeah, not gonna lie, certain seasons being basically like, play the seasonal activity 56 times, and that's how you complete the story and progress the quest. That did annoy me a little bit.
keep comparing the Destiny 1 expansions to the seasonal model because these expansions would release at the same frequency as the seasonal models.
Okay, that's not quite true. We used to get 4 seasons per year, and the most expansions that have ever been released in 1 year is 2, so...
It just goes to show you the difference in the amount of content we got back then compared to what we get now.
Another thing to consider there is that they pre-made a lot of the content before Destiny 1 even came out. Like, they did have to reboot House of Wolves and The Dark Below, but a lot of that content was created before Destiny 1 came out, which is why they were able to have so much coming out in such a short period of time.
When The Taken King came out, I stopped coming out. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. To a passerby, it might have looked like I had a 1,000-yard stare, but in actuality, I had never been more engaged. And how could I not be? It had the best campaign yet, with 26 story missions, 4 new strikes, 8 new Crucible maps, 17 new exotic weapons.
8 new Crucible maps, 17 exotic weapons. It's absolutely ridiculous to compare that to today's standard. The Taken King just delivered so much innovation and so much content to the core of the game, which absolutely just shook up the entire standard that everyone was expecting. And that's why I still think Taken King is arguably the best expansion of all time.
A brand new enemy type, the Taken. A whole new area to explore, the Dreadnought, which was full of tons of little secrets and mysteries to uncover. It had 3 new subclasses to toy with, all of which fit the respective classes perfectly and were considerably different from the subclasses we'd had before, with each one adding a significant amount of depth and fun to the overall sandbox. And on top of all that, we were given one of the longest, most in-depth raids in all of Destiny. The Taken King also did something that I'll never forget, so I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to remember the Loot Cave. And for those of you who don't know, this was a thing people would do where they would stand outside of a specific cave and kill a bunch of enemies to spawn a sea of engrams to cash into the Cryptarch. The reason they did this was because engrams were kind of BS in vanilla Destiny. They worked a little differently. Oftentimes you would get a legendary engram, but when you turned it into the Cryptarch, you would get a blue or a green item instead.
Yeah, that was one of the most hated things to ever happen in the history of the game. Like, imagine today, you get an exotic engram, you go to Rahul to turn it in, and he's like, oh, here's some like upgrade modules. Yeah, that was basically what was happening back in the day.
Naturally, everybody hated this, so they eventually fixed it. But 1 year later, they went a step further. See, when the Taken King came out, if you were a veteran player, you were given a green engram. And when you turned in this particular green engram into the Cryptarch,
Good indeed.
Did I just get a Red Death off an uncommon?
not
That
only was it a
reaction.
guaranteed exotic drop, but it was guaranteed to give you an exotic that you didn't already have. I saw this as an open apology from Bungie. They were, in a way, making up for the time that we wasted at that loot cave. And it was an apology that I happily accepted, because instead of apologizing with words, they apologized with action. And
Fun fact, the loot cave actually wasn't the most effective way to farm in vanilla. Like, a lot of people assume like, oh, the loot cave was super OP. You just had to stand there and shoot into the cave and you get infinite loot. And like, yes, while that's technically true, there were better ways to farm if you were actually playing the game instead of just like basically AFKing and sitting next to the loot cave.
This was part of why I had so much faith in Bungie for so long. Because back then, it really did feel like Bungie had our best interest at heart.
Ah, self-res, the classic.
Destiny 2 had been delayed for an entire year, so we got Rise of Iron in place of that. And as much as I enjoyed it, it really did feel like a placeholder. Like it was all Bungie could put together to tide us over for the year. The story was forgettable, the new location wasn't really all that new as they kinda just expanded on the Cosmodrome. The new Siva enemy type also wasn't all that new as they were just reskinned Fallen. The new Strike was average and Supremacy was mediocre. However, the raid was excellent. It's probably one of my favorites in the series. Overall, I was somewhat let down by Rise of Iron, but I could tell that Bungie tried their best, and Destiny had never been in a better spot than it was at this point in time. Over the 2 years since the game came out, they made so many quality of life changes that drastically improved the game. They added
especially
in so
with
much
Age of
content,
Triumph.
and the difference between Destiny on day one and post Rise of Iron was night and day. Destiny was far from perfect, but it was reliable. It went through a lot of changes. With every change, there was one constant. It was always fun. For 3 years, it was a game you could boot up and get completely lost in. Throughout the entirety of Destiny's lifespan, they had seemingly learned a lot from their mistakes, and as a result, they had built up enough goodwill to make me froth at the mouth with excitement for Destiny 2. In my mind, there was absolutely no way that Destiny 2 could disappoint.
I wonder what he's going to have to say next. Wow. I think this was actually, to be fair, I think this was actually quite a common sentiment at the time. Like, I remember watching a lot of videos from my favorite creators who made Destiny stuff, and they were like, Destiny has finally evolved. Bungie has learned from their mistakes, and Destiny 2 is going to fix all of the issues and move on from all the issues that we have, like melee's whiffing and servers being laggy. And I mean, Destiny fixed some of those when it went to Destiny 2, but yeah, I think I have a feeling that this next part of the video, he's not going to be too happy with how Destiny 2 resulted. So let's see. Oh no, the sad music.
I have never been more disappointed with a video game in my life. Vanilla Destiny 2 was such a massive disappointment that it actually caused me to lose a lot of my faith in Bungie and in gaming as a whole. I became bitter and angry at the industry at large. I felt that the rug had been pulled out from beneath me, and for years afterwards it became difficult to allow myself to drop my guard enough to become invested in a video game. I have no idea what those hammerheads over at Bungie were thinking. They made our Guardians significantly slower by taking away our mobility. Our abilities took forever to recharge, ranging anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes to get a super back. And they made us significantly less powerful by taking our special weapons away and putting them in the heavy slot, meaning that we were stuck with 2 primaries. Random rolls were gone, replaced with static rolls, aka no rolls, which stripped the game of its variety.
I think basically what he's demonstrated in like the past 30 seconds is just how simplified Destiny 2 was compared to Destiny 1. Like, they basically took all of the complicated systems that they had in Destiny 1, like random roll weapons and like the subclasses. I'm sure he's going to talk about the subclasses in a moment. But they took all of these systems that were rich and complex and customizable, and then they dumbed them all down to like, there's only one version of Better Devils and you're going to like it. And I think that is what really ticked off a lot of veteran players.
Armor no longer had any perks at all. Subclasses weren't customizable anymore, which stripped away even more variety, along with a significant amount of depth. There were hardly any secrets or mysteries to uncover. The time to kill in the Crucible was agonizingly long, making matches unbearably slow as most games would time out. Filling out the score was a rarity. 6v6 was gone, replaced by 4v4. Rumble was gone, also replaced by 4v4, and a lot of the fun was gone.
Something that always stood out to me was the amount of stuff that I expected to carry over, and then for no reason, it just didn't. Like, private matches, they just didn't exist. Like, why? Like, everyone loved private matches in D1. Why would they not carry over to D2? Everyone loved Rumble. Why would it not come to D2? Everyone loved 6v6. Why would it not come over to D2? There was a lot of these decisions that just felt like really stupid in retrospect. And I'm not really sure why they happened, but yeah, I totally understand his perspective here.
It was completely devoid of everything that made Destiny special. To genuinely think that vanilla Destiny 2 was good would be 79% delusion and 21% delirium. I felt betrayed. In one fell swoop, they had undone 3 years of build-up and goodwill. This franchise that had become a huge part of my life had suddenly disappeared overnight. The only leg up that Destiny 2 had over Destiny 1 was that it had a coherent story. And it was a very simple story, but for Destiny, it was rather impactful. Gaul was able to steal our light from the Traveler, and seeing the tower get blown up was kind of shocking. It showed us that they meant business. And then you get your light taken away and you gotta walk through the wilderness for like
This was such an underrated story. Like, I think especially this part that he's showing right here was really, really cool and impactful, and unlike anything that we've seen in Destiny's history.
The stakes felt palpable, and ultimately Gaul was just another villain of the week for Destiny. But the journey we took in order to kill him was very different from what we'd gotten before and what we've gotten since. But apparently Bungie themselves weren't too impressed with the campaign because they completely removed it from the game 2 years later. Something I found alarming about Destiny 2 is how it marked a notable shift in Bungie's overall philosophy as a company.
You know, good is never good enough for Bungie.
Everybody cares. Everybody sits in the same big pit, and we're all in it together, and it's a good feeling.
The people here are really critical. It's really hard to impress them.
So that was old footage.
Curse of Osiris was, and still is, one of the worst expansions in Destiny history. It did nothing to fix the existing issues that the game had. In fact, it made everything worse. The campaign itself was trash, or rather, the bin next to the trash, recyclables, because it recycled content that already existed in the game.
Oh
One
my.
of its new missions was actually just a strike that had already been in the game for 3 months. A strike that they didn't even
People
make
were
any
not happy
changes
about that.
to adapt it to the expansion. And then, 2 of its story missions turned out not to be missions at all, but were instead the 2 new strikes that came with the expansion, but they put those into the campaign to make it seem like they were campaign missions. On top of that, we got more bad news. At this time, Bungie was also throttling our XP, meaning that the longer you played the game, the less XP you would get.
Yeah, that was an incredible debacle. People absolutely hated the fact that the more you played, the less experience you would earn, and it just was a vicious cycle where like you would play and invest all your time and you're like, oh, I'm gonna level up a whole bunch. Then you actually go look at your experience and it's like, oh, you've gained like 12 experience in the last 3 hours.
The numbers that showed up on the bottom of your screen
Whoa. What is it? Is that a toe? Is that a foot? Oh my gosh. I almost didn't notice that, but that is disturbing.
never changed to accurately display the amount of XP that you were currently getting. And in some cases, you would actually be getting up to 95% less XP than what the game was telling you. And leveling up was pretty important, because you would get a bright engram, which would unlock stuff in the Eververse. Now, it doesn't take a genius or an Einstein to realize that Bungie did this in order to artificially inflate the time it takes for you to level up, which would incentivize you to play their game for longer. And once the community found out about this, Bungie fixed it immediately. But they doubled the amount of XP that was required to level up. Whoever came up with that nifty little idea must have a real cold heart. Then, to make matters worse, if you didn't buy Curse of Osiris, then the game would lock you out of activities that were previously available to you. And I refused to give Bungie any applause for this expansion. Not even a single clap. Spoiler alert, Warmind sucked too. It did little to nothing to improve Destiny 2's situation. While it was better than Curse of Osiris, it still wasn't even good enough to keep my dog engaged. Okay.
At least it added private matches though. That's
Here we
something.
go.
Power up the javelin.
What is going on?
She's fighting me, man. She's locking up like she's got rigor mortis. Much like Curse of Osiris, Warmind also recycled content by tricking us into thinking
What is
that
it-
these two
what is with this guy and his
were
feet?
actually story missions.
He's playing with
This
his
was about
toes.
the time when they started bringing back old weapons and exotic armor pieces from Destiny 1, which I found to be insulting. It was a waste of our time, because they destroyed our vaults from the first game, right? They took away all the gear we spent 3 years grinding for, only to have us grind for that very same gear all over over again.
And this is just the very beginning. I mean, with sunsetting coming in the future, I'm sure he's going to be real happy about that, where we get like the 8th version of the hung jury. That's a lovely one. And yeah, there literally have been 7 versions of hung jury so far.
You're telling me I gotta grind out like 30 public events so that I can get 60 of these resonant stems, which randomly unlocks one of 40 nodes on the map that I then have to search for like an idiot 15 times just so that I can get the same gun that I already got before.
And the voice acting took a significant dip.
There might still be a warsat left in Earth's orbit. Let me see if I can adjust its trajectory.
The loading screens became eternal, taking anywhere from 45 seconds to over a minute to simply load into the tower. However, Bungie did make some improvements.
Character movement is way faster, way faster.
They came out with the Go Fast update, which made our Guardians go fast, but not go too fast. We were still go slow. Now, as much as I liked having faster movement, the Crucible maps weren't designed around our characters having this much mobility. I think it was also around this point in time where they released their first ever dungeon, which was actually a pretty damn awesome piece of content. It had a sense of mystery and
it's
wonder.
Not a dungeon.
It was challenging, and it was tense. Really.
The first dungeon was actually the Shattered Throne, and that came out in Forsaken. The Whisper is, technically speaking, an exotic mission, but it does kind of feel like a dungeon, I guess. I mean, it was pretty secretive, and it was really hard to do at first, and nobody knew about it, so it did kind of have some of the same vibes as a dungeon would.
It's sort of everything I look for in a PvE activity. Good thing they removed it from the game a couple years later. While Warmind did make some small improvements to Destiny 2, there were still several issues that needed to be inaugurally addressed.
Okay, I think that one's a little bit of a reach.
This was it. This was do or die for Bungie. If Forsaken had Forsuckened, Bungie would have probably gone out of business. So in order to
Okay, that's actually true. The Curse of Osiris was doing so bad, the population was dipping so hard that I actually think this was a make or break moment for Destiny. There's a lot of times that people are like, oh, this is the make or break moment. And like literally every single year, someone says it's a make or break moment. It's not true, but there are a few cases where it has been a make or break moment, and this was one of them.
Build up hype and get people talking about this expansion, Bungie killed off Cayde 6. They claimed that he was dead for real.
Is he really dead?
He looks dead.
He
does not look good.
Exactly.
He's dead.
Okay.
He is dead.
He's dead, wow.
He's dead.
But I didn't believe him. In fact, I made a video claiming that Cayde would make a return.
All right, first of all, I am willing to bet so much money that Cayde is not permanently dead.
You're pretty good on these predictions, so, you know, this sounds right to me.
At the time, I remember there were so many people that were just in denial. Like the Twitter video came out from E3 where they showed that first cinematic where it was just spinning in a circle with the music and it showed Cayde dying, basically. I mean, he died off screen, but yeah, it was pretty crazy because nobody wanted to accept it at first. And I mean, sure enough, he is back in final shape, but I think it's fair to say that he did die. I mean, canonically speaking.
And wouldn't you know it, I was right. They're bringing him back in the final shape. Now, regardless, Forsaken had one of the best Destiny campaigns. I would highly recommend that you go play it and check it out for yourself. Oh, wait. Never mind. Ultimately...
Yeah, I think that's a complaint that a lot of people have. Like, sometimes I get comments from people who have actually never played Destiny, and the only thing that they know about the game is that it removes its own content. So... yeah, honestly, the DCV probably did, like, incalculable damage to this franchise.
Forsaken was awesome. It gave Destiny 2 a pretty sizable colonioscopy by cleaning out all the shit and putting Destiny back
quite
to
a reach
the way
on
we
that
wanted it to
one.
be by doing all kinds of stuff, like getting rid of the 2 primary weapon system that was introduced in vanilla Destiny. They put random rolls back into the weapons. They put armor perks back into the armor. They added 9 new subclass options to pick from, and it came with 2 brand new locations to explore. The Tangled Shore and one of my all-time favorite Destiny locations, the Dreaming City. It didn't recycle any content, and it also came with Gambit, which people really liked at first, but ultimately it wound up being another game mode with a lot of potential that Bungie decided to abandon.
Okay, I think it's slightly unfair to say that Bungie chose to abandon it. I think the decision to do that was mostly based on the community's decision to abandon it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Bungie has like a very limited number of resources to invest in the development and advancement of this game, and they don't want to spend all of their resources on something that people don't really like or don't really care about. So it would be pretty illogical for them to be like, we're now having another episode of The Drifter, and now there's going to be a whole bunch of new Gambit content that would not really go over well. So I think, I mean, Bungie did definitely de-emphasize Gambit after Season of the Drifter, but that was ultimately a result of the player base not wanting it.
There were things to grind for now, and most importantly, the Crucible was fun again.
2 for 1. Yes! 3 down! 2 for 1. Yes! 3 down! Look at them fall! I've seen enough!
The heart of Destiny was beginning to beat once more. While I was happy with this expansion, couldn't help but shake the feeling that this was where Destiny 2 should have been at launch. So it's tough to cut Bungie slack for adding things into the game that should have been here since day one. And there were still some issues, you know, the load times were worse than ever. Unlocking all 9 subclasses was absurdly grindy. They implemented 6v6 game types back into the Crucible, but again, these maps weren't designed for 12-player matches.
Okay, I actually hear this quite a lot. People are like, oh, the Destiny 2 vanilla maps were not meant for 12 players and therefore they're too crowded. And yet, some of the D2 vanilla maps are some of the best maps we have ever seen, even for 6v6. Like, I think the average Destiny player would agree that Javelin is one of the best maps for 6v6. Even though it was designed for 4v4. So I don't really get the point where people say, oh, they were designed for 4v4, so they suck for 6v6, because a lot of them just work really well for both.
They were designed for 8 players. You also couldn't even play Forsaken unless you had purchased both Curse of Osiris and the Warmind DLC. And while the future of Destiny was
a barrier
brighter,
to entry.
I still hadn't let my guard down quite yet.
What worries me is that the cycle will continue, that history is going to repeat itself, because Bungie is made up of several different teams. And right now, the team that made Vanilla Destiny 2, the worst version of Destiny we've experienced to date, is out there right now as we speak, making Destiny 3.
What? I mean, oh, okay, so he added text on screen that says making the next expansion. But you do realize that the same people who made Forsaken are the same people who are making the next expansion too, right? It's not like Bungie has 12 different teams where they're each working on a new expansion individually without any collaboration or cross-pollination between the two. I don't really get this point at all.
So this was when Bungie switched from releasing expansions once every few months into the seasonal model that they have now. And this change is what ended up being one of the things that sort of killed Destiny for me. Like, yeah, sure, we got content, right? But the content we got had no substance. The first thing it came with was the Black Forge, which was nothing more than an arena where you would kill Cabal, then pick up a Cabal ball, then throw the Cabal ball at the Cabal spire.
So many Cabals!
Then you're not going to believe this. A boss spawns. And then you're not going to believe this either. You kill the boss. There were 4 arenas that you could do this in, and that was it. That was all we got to tide us over for 3 months.
Okay, hold on. That's just categorically false. I mean, we got a raid. We got, like, tons of new awesome weapons. I mean, these forges came with tons of new loot. We got stuff like the Izanagi's Burden quest. I mean, the Scourge of the Past gave us Anarchy, which was an incredibly meta-defining weapon. There was actually quite a bit that came with this seasonal release, and it would be definitely incorrect to say that the only thing that came out was the forges.
It added nothing new to the gameplay sandbox, and what made this even worse was if you wanted to play the Black Forge, you had to level up your character to like power level 600.
Okay, that actually was a pretty big issue. The forges required like a ridiculously high power level, so people would unlock the new season and they'd be ready to just jump in and play the new activities, and then they'd be like, oh, actually we have to go grind Gambit and all the other activities to increase our power before we can get to the new content. And I remember that did really upset a lot of people.
10. But to level him up, you had to complete the very same strikes, pinnacles, lost sectors, and public events that you'd already been doing over the past 3 months since Forsaken came out. So now, Destiny was simultaneously recycling content while game padding, which is terribly disrespectful to the player's time. And this was when Destiny had completely lost its sense of fun and adventure in place of grinding and tedium. And as a result, it started to feel more like a job rather than a hobby. What made this even worse was that 2/3 of the content we paid for wouldn't even be available to us until 3 months later when the next season dropped. Then we would have to wait another 3 months for the season after that to play the final batch of the annual passes content. We were forced into buying all all of the seasons in advance because there was no option to buy them separately. A clever ploy by Bungie to get you to log back in at least once every 3 months in order to make you feel like you got your money's worth. So 3 months after the Black Forge, we got the Reckoning, which had you go to an arena, kill a bunch of enemies. After that, you go to a bridge, capture 6 control points on that bridge, where you then go to another arena where there is another boss. And the thing about this particular boss that makes it different from the other bosses is that you have to kill this one.
Okay, I really don't get this. It seems like he is roasting the bosses by the fact that they are killable. Like, every boss in every game ever, you kill the boss, so I don't really understand how that is a criticism to have. I mean, to be clear, I think this is a great video, but at the end of the day, like, some of these criticisms are kind of strange to me.
And that's it. This activity really wasn't all that great. Yet you're expected to play through it a couple dozen times to get all the gear from it so that you can go play Gambit Prime, which made a bunch of changes to the Gambit game type. So if you didn't like Gambit, which most people didn't, you had no reason to play. And 3 months after that, we got the Menagerie, which was actually pretty good. It had us going through a gauntlet of tasks and obstacles hosted by Callus. It was novel, engaging, and replayable. If the other 2 seasonal activities were half as good as this, I probably would have been a happy camper. So to break this down, for $35, the annual pass gave us 3 seasonal activities, a Gambit game type, a bunch of tedious exotic quests.
Okay, hold on. I mean, obviously, whatever comes in an annual pass is not going to be as good as the expansion itself. And especially when you're taking a look at Forsaken, which had famously one of the most complete content packages of all time. Yeah, obviously the episodes / seasons / whatever you want to call them, they're not going to stack up to the expansion itself.
In 2 raids. Mind you, $35 is roughly what the Taken King cost. And to further sweeten the deal, within about a year and a half, all of this content would be completely removed from the game. And all the gear you'd gotten from the annual pass and Forsaken would be sunset, which is the term Bungie uses when they make it so that you can't level up your gun anymore, meaning that that gun has essentially become worthless, since you can't bring it into any activities without putting yourself at a severe disadvantage. I really loved using some of those guns too. I spent a ton of time using my loaded question because it would make Guardians explode when it had a full clip. It was great for clearing mobs too. And when Bungie sunset this weapon, it exposed me to one of Destiny's harshest truths. That if you love something in Destiny, eventually, it'll be taken away from you. It'll either get nerfed, patched out, sunset, or completely removed from the game.
Something that's interesting is that this is actually a thing in D1 too. Like, D1 had sunsetting as well, but it was never really discussed as a big issue because they added so much new stuff into the game that replaced the old stuff. So it didn't really feel like you were losing because there was so much new content that just made you forget about the stuff that you had lost. But I think the difference in Destiny 2 was Beyond Light gave us like 40 weapons and we lost like several hundred. So it felt like a colossal loss.
This is something that all Destiny fans have experienced with far too much consistency over the past 7 years. And at a certain point, you can't help but ask yourself, why would I bother spending countless hours grinding for weapons that might get nerfed in a month or might get sunset? And then you wonder why people don't keep coming back to your game. But ultimately, with the seasonal model, it felt like Bungie was slowly trickling out the bare minimum amount of content to keep us hooked, drip feeding us morsels in order to keep us on the hook, and it felt manipulative. At the time, I was shocked that the majority of the Destiny fanbase was completely fine with this. So once again, I made a video about it. I felt like I had to because I was afraid that if we as a community were to settle and pay Bungie for this lackluster content without criticizing them, that Bungie will think they can get away with shipping more repetitive, monotonous, mundane content, which is exactly what happened. In a surprising turn of events, Bungie had split up with Activision and it seemed like things might finally turn around again. Because at the time, there was this narrative online that Activision was the root cause of Destiny's failures. That they were breathing down Bungie's neck, forcing them to make all kinds of scummy business decisions and ship mundane content.
There was so much speculation at that time.
Why the player base allowed Bungie to get away with so much. For me, the split gave off this impression that Destiny would finally have the opportunity to reach the potential that us fans always knew it could reach. I, for one, was extremely hopeful. I even made a video expressing that hopefulness, because I truly thought that they would come out swinging with their first expansion, right? That Bungie would have all the reason in the world to let their talent shine and blow us away with their first ever independent project, now that they're no longer under the greedy corporate thumb of Activision. If Destiny was ever going to get back on track, now was the time to do it.
The thing was, though, they also lost two of their major studios, Vicarious Visions, and I forget what the other one was called, but these were two major Activision studios that were working with Bungie in collaboration to make the game. So when they had that split, they lost the support of those supplementary studios, and that really took a big hit on the amount of content and the quality of content that they were able to pump out.
Shadowkeep was a massive letdown. They gave us a mediocre campaign, 2 mediocre strikes, and a brand new location, the moon. Well,
okay, despite what he's saying about it being a letdown, it was actually a quite big period for the game because so many people came in from free to play that there was this massive surge in popularity. Like the numbers were off the charts at the very beginning because previously it was a paid game. There was this big barrier to entry where you had to buy it for $60 and then buy the expansions too. So having it go free to play definitely did, at least temporarily, increase its popularity. But yeah, we'll see how things go as people actually get into the game and see what it's like.
It was brand new if you'd never played Destiny 1, since it was literally just a reskin of the moon from Destiny 1. Now granted, they did add an extra section to it, I'll give them that, but the other 75% of it was reskinned. In fact, a majority of the content
that did annoy me a little bit.
was actually reskinned. They took that Shadow Thief strike from Destiny 1 and split it up into 2 nightmare hunts.
Are you serious? They're like beat for beat repeating the strike. Is this like even legal?
Legal or not, they should still be thrown into the slammer. They recycled the Fogoth strike. They recycled the Gaul boss fight, the Fanatic boss fight from Forsaken, and they even recycled Crota. The exotic quests in here too were absolute trash. You were given a laundry list of busy work to complete in order to unlock an exotic gun, this rocket launcher here. I cut this little montage together in my Shadowkeep review to illustrate my point. Take it away, boys.
Now, the very first thing you're going to need to do is to complete the Shadowkeep campaign.
You also have to pick up the Lunar Spelunker bounty that Eris has featured in her inventory,
where you need to complete 3 different lost sectors.
And upon the completion of the 3rd, the bounty will be complete, and then you're going to get a special quest item, the Firewall Data Fragment.
You will go to the final lost sector in Sorrow's Harbor and drop that fragment where it needs to go.
So once you access this room, you can use the node right here, and it'll give you Saimota's Broken Necklace,
which you'll need to charge up by killing nightmares on the moon with arc abilities.
Now, once you've completed that step, head back to Eris Morn,
and then give her the completed necklace.
She'll then send you to collect bones from public events near Hellmouth, and you simply need to complete 1 public event to get the completion.
Now for the ritualistic bone, this just has you do the lost sector in Sorrow's Harbor. You've done it before, do it again.
After those steps are complete, you're gonna load up the Scarlet Keep Strike to kill the High Conductor.
Now, you need to get red health bar enemy kills, yellow health bar enemy kills, as well as boss kills.
And then the very final thing that will remain will be a quest mission called Symphony of Death.
Kill the enemies, get the final piece, and make your way to Eris Morn,
who will give you the Deathbringer rocket launcher.
That was quite a bit, yeah.
Now, the tedium in these exotic quests had been a problem ever since Warmind, but it got worse and worse as time went on, because now, you not only had to do monotonous grinds to unlock exotic guns, but also to unlock campaign missions. And I'm going to call this grind gating. To access Mission 3, you are forced to complete public events and patrols, my least favorite things in the whole galaxy. I really couldn't take it anymore.
Same,
in my
honestly.
disappointment, I of course made another video about it, which wasn't received very well, because the audience reception for Shadowkeep was overwhelmingly positive at that time, which meant that the once very critical Destiny fanbase had now not only settled for a product that was below average or mediocre at best, but they were even praising it.
I don't know about that. Did Shadowkeep really come out and everyone was like, yeah, this is the best thing we've ever seen? I don't think so. I mean, especially after Forsaken, it was clear that Shadowkeep was nowhere near the level of Forsaken, and I think people realized that. So I would never describe the reception of Shadowkeep at any point to be overwhelmingly positive.
Sending a loud and clear message to Bungie that they can get away with creating mediocre content now. It took me far too long to realize that the community had been sending this message to Bungie for years now. I had lost the battle. Over those years, the content had shifted and the fan base shifted along with it. The game I knew and the community I knew was completely gone. And this was when I started to detach myself from the franchise that I once loved, because I no longer felt hopeful about its future. It became immediately clear to me that Activision was not at fault for Destiny's previous failures, but it was instead the fault of Bungie all along. That all of our ill will had been directed towards the wrong outlet. And it was around this time when Bungie started vaulting old content. They removed entire planets and entire campaigns that we paid for with just a snap of their finger. Vaulting content is a big problem for both the players and for Bungie. Because how can Bungie put their heart and souls into a project that they know is going to be deleted from the game in 2 years? And the very fact that this content is going to be deleted significantly lessens its artistic value. It makes it feel like this is content that is meant to be consumed rather than appreciated. Like it's being made purely to satiate the rapacious appetite of the Destiny fanbase instead of being made from a place of passion. And furthermore, if they hadn't removed all that content from the game, it would make Destiny 2 far more welcoming to a newcomer. Because not only would they have an endless swath of content to complete that would keep them coming back to the game, but they would also be able to follow the Destiny 2 story from its very beginning.
Yeah, so I recently made a video where I brought my new friend into the game who has never played before, and it was really painful to explain to him, like, yeah, so Red War was a thing, but sorry, you can't experience it. And like, he does the intro quest, he goes to the tower, and it's like, the number one thing recommended for him was to do the most recent campaign. And he was just so lost in this story. He was like, who are all these characters? Who are all these people? Like, it was just completely mind-boggling to him because he didn't have any of the context or any of the backstory. And you shouldn't have to go watch a 5-hour Destiny story recap to understand this. Like, having the stuff no longer be in the game is just a huge barrier to entry to anyone who's returning or new to the franchise.
Feel more invested as a result. Also, Bungie could charge people for these expansions and make more money. Now, I get that they needed to remove all this content so that the game wouldn't take up too much hard drive space, but there's such an easy
There were other
fix
reasons
for
too,
this, right? When you go to download the Master Chief Collection, it lets you pick and choose which Halo games you want to install. So just do that. Literally just do that.
You know, I don't claim to have a complete understanding of this, but I am 100% certain that if that was a viable solution, they would have done it. I mean, I think some people make the assumption that Bungie is just stupid, but they clearly are not, and they would have thought of that if it was an actual reasonable solution to do.
At this point, Destiny had hurt me so many times, and it took me on such a roller coaster, from the highest highs of Destiny 1 to the lowest lows with Curse of Osiris, right back to the highest highs with Forsaken, and then back into the dumps again with the Annual Pass and Shadowkeep. And the fact that Forsaken was so damn good is what made Shadowkeep sting even more, because for a brief moment in time, it felt like we were going to get Destiny back. Then the split with Activision shined a beacon of light on that hope.
That's a cool transition.
Only for Shadowkeep to once again snuff that light into darkness as it took Destiny 2 deeper and deeper into a live service rabbit hole. This franchise had once again escaped the clutches of Salvation's grip, and my trust had been dismantled. And let me tell you, my life drastically improved when I finally put Destiny behind me. And when I finally came outside for the first time in 3 years, I realized that the sun is a lot like the Traveler.
Wow.
In the sense that it gives us light. Isn't that crazy? I also realized that it became abundantly clear that Bungie didn't care at all about their player base. Instead, they cared about increasing their player base.
Increasing your player base and caring about your player base are often one and the same. If you don't have a happy player base, they're probably going to leave you. And you can't increase your player base when everyone is continuously leaving you. So, I don't know. I just think that's important to point out. Hold on, I thought we already covered sunsetting and beyond light.
I didn't buy Beyond Light right away, but when I did, I discovered that the amount of content in this expansion was in fact beyond light. I thought that the location was bland, the storyline was cheesy, and Stasis was kinda boring. Stasis also made the Crucible a pain in the ass to play in.
Okay, that's
getting
true.
Frozen left and right just isn't fun.
It was so
but
bad,
I wasn't
man.
even really able to play with Stasis too much and get a good feel for it anyway because they grind-gated it. At least they introduced a brand new subclass system, Subclass 3.0, which was a really nice addition. It only took them 3 years, but now you could finally have the same amount of subclass customizability that you had in vanilla Destiny 1, except now
More
the
so.
menu was far more cluttered despite having less perks. This change did give the game more depth. Actually, you know what? I misspoke. This change gave the game the illusion of depth, because
I would not say it's an illusion. I mean, to be fair, the 3.0 system did add a lot more customization than we ever had in Destiny 1. Like, it might look like we have a lot of those nodes from D1, but in D2, the simple addition of fragments and aspects, like those just add so much more build crafting potential than D1 ever had, so.
now you've got all 6 of these subclass perks, right? Then you have the artifact, which has 12 perks, then each gun has 3 perks for a total of 12 perks, and each armor piece can have up to 4 mods, which totals out to about 20 mods at once, and it's all just too much stuff to keep track of. I look at all of this and I can feel my eyes start to glaze over, so I end up ignoring all of it. But that's the thing. You can completely ignore everything here and be totally fine because the actual gameplay
low-level
itself,
stuff.
for a majority of the activities, is
There
so
you go.
insultingly basic that you don't need to craft any builds for it at all. This is actually one of Destiny's biggest problems. Over time, the Guardians have evolved quite a bit, with all sorts of new weapons and subclasses, but the enemies haven't evolved along with them. Their AI is trash, and as soon as they spawn, they get obliterated. The enemies weren't designed with all these fancy new weapons or abilities in mind. They were designed around the nerfed Guardians that we were forced to play as in vanilla Destiny 2. And so as we've grown in power, the game has actually become less fun. And this is why I didn't care for the Witch Queen, even though it really was a solid Destiny expansion. But at the end of the day, it was still the same old Destiny, whose formula had become antiquated at this point. Meanwhile, the Crucible had been completely ignored for over 2 years at this point. With no new maps, no new game modes, nothing. Bungie had completely abandoned their PvP player base.
This is one of the things that really sets the Destiny 2 era apart from Destiny 1 and like the early parts of Destiny 2. So, I mean, 777 days without a Crucible map. It actually ended up being over 1,000 eventually, but yeah, the things that set like Forsaken and Taken King apart was the focus on the core playlist. Like with Gambit being introduced, a whole new core playlist, with Taken King delivering so many PvP maps, I think it was 8, with Forsaken also delivering quite a few PvP maps. Like the difference is just night and day. And now that we actually are starting to finally get a renewed focus on PvP again, I think things are starting to finally heal.
Then Lightfall released, which for Bungie was actually a pretty hard fall. It came with another strand new subclass, which I wasn't able to experiment with all that much because they had once again grind-gated all of the subclass perks.
Okay, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, you could get these pretty fast if you just went to Neomuna and did stuff. I don't know.
I will admit, though, that picking up a big old ball of strand and tossing it to blow up enemies is really fun. And it was pretty cool that they introduced a grappling hook grenade.
The grapple was actually really impressive. Like, doing that much of a technical innovation almost 10 years into a franchise is pretty unprecedented. So I'm very impressed that they were actually able to pull off the grapple and actually able to have it work so seamlessly.
Sure, that went over really well in all those Crucible maps that weren't designed around the player having a grappling hook. And that Lightfall campaign was
surprisingly was actually fine. Like, Crucible did not get destroyed by grapple being OP. I mean, sure, okay, it let you get out of bounds in a couple places, but in the grand scheme, Crucible was totally fine.
Awful. The tone was way off, the jokes were bad, the characters were boring, this character in particular was a real nimbecile, and the missions were more of the same.
Wow, I've
in
heard
fact,
that one
Lightfall
before.
was so bad that it caused Bungie to lay off a bunch of their employees because they didn't hit their profit margins. And some dark decider over at Bungie darkly decided to not tell any of the employees who got laid off that they lost their job. All 100 or so of those poor souls just showed up for work one day and weren't even allowed to go inside the building. A lot of important people got laid laid off too. One of them was Michael Salvatore, who made a majority of the music for this franchise. And it's like, Bungie, how are you going to do
unfortunate.
that? How are you going to fire the guy who's been responsible for establishing and maintaining a huge part of Destiny's identity? Well, that's a little bit of a loaded question. The answer? Because he had too many shares in the company, and if he quit, he would have taken those shares with him. Whereas if they laid him off, those shares stay within the company. It's pretty clear that Bungie doesn't care all that much about Destiny's identity anyway, because they've started integrating other properties into the Destiny universe for money. I mean, nothing breaks the believability of your world more than a Ghostbusters spaceship. Like, yeah, sure, we got ghosts in this game, but ain't none of them need no bustin'. And speaking of the Eververse, Destiny 2 only became more and more predatory as time went on. Astacross made an excellent 35-minute video where he detailed just how gross and greedy Destiny 2 has become, with its confusing pay structure, its price increases, and its pay-to-win elements. You know, I actually made a video about 5 years back talking about how Destiny 2 had some pay-to-win elements creeping into it, and that if we didn't speak up, it would only get worse. And all those commenters told me I was wrong. And now, when I look at everything that they've announced for the final shape, I can't help but feel angry. I have so much that I want to say, but I'm going to have to save my thoughts on all of that for when I review the final shape next month. Destiny has been a franchise that for 10 years has consistently overpromised and underdelivered, that has disrespected its player base's time and money with boneheaded decisions that have only served to cause long-term damage to Destiny and its community. Bungie as a studio has flip-flopped on nearly every decision they've made, vaulting content, then unvaulting content, sunsetting, then unsunsetting, killing Cade but then bringing him back, separating from Activision to be independent like they always wanted, to only then sell themselves to Sony. In my eyes, all of their integrity has been lost. Bungie has a really bad reputation, but despite everything, Destiny 2 can certainly be a fun game to play. But so much of what Bungie has done with it over the years has left me with such a bad taste in my mouth that I can't help but feel resentment and disgust towards it as I play. Destiny has hurt me pretty deeply, and it hasn't made any efforts to make reparations for the damage that it's done. It's only gotten more predatory and more grindy as time has gone on. The Bungie that gave us a free exotic in the form of a green engram is no more. And now, Bungie is doing what they do best, hyping up the final shape. And as usual, people are really excited for this expansion, especially because Bungie has historically always been at their best when their back is up against the wall, when it's do or die. Now, I have been wrong before, but I don't see how they can salvage this game, because even if it is the best expansion that Destiny 2 has ever had, at the end of the day, it'll still just be Destiny 2.
And that's okay.
You know, in looking back over the past 10 years of Destiny for this video, I've realized that it's actually taken up a pretty big chunk of my life. A big chunk that I'll never get back. I'm actually really excited for the final shape to release, because once I finish that, it's over. Destiny is done.
I mean, okay, let's be clear. That's not actually the case.
Finally. And yeah, I know that they're going to put out like episodes or whatever, but I'm going to completely ignore those. Because the time has finally come for me to sunset Destiny.
Okay, that was a really interesting perspective. I mean, I think he is someone who hasn't played every single year, or at least hasn't played a lot every single year. I could tell, I mean, a few of the expansions were glossed over with, you know, Beyond Light, Witch Queen, Lightfall, and especially the most recent stuff. I mean, the latest event for Into the Light wasn't even mentioned at all. And I mean, as someone who has played all of those, I think that morale is actually in a pretty good spot right now heading into Final Shape, and the future does actually seem bright. I know it's kind of a cliche thing to say, and it's been said a million times throughout Destiny's history, but I honestly do think that the future of this game is bright headed into Final Shape. Also, to be clear, even though I don't agree with every single opinion that is presented here, I mean, that's totally fine. And I mean, people are welcome to disagree with me in the comments as well. But I think overall, it is just interesting to hear from someone who has a more outside perspective. I mean, this isn't a Destiny channel, as he mentioned. He covers a lot of stuff that isn't Destiny. So from my perspective as a Destiny player, stuff does look a little bit different, but it's definitely interesting to see so many different takes, especially in the comments here. It's so depressingly funny when I talk to people about the final shape, they all say the same thing. I'm excited because it'll finally be over. Yikes. I mean, okay, I think a lot of people probably will leave after final shape, but especially if final shape is good, and if they actually like Destiny, if they actually like final shape, they will come back eventually. I mean, it might be until Destiny 3 if that's a thing in the future, but I don't see a world where someone who really likes Destiny, plays final shape, really loves it, and then just screws off forever and never returns. I think, I mean, there is probably a case where that happens for some people, but I would imagine they're definitely in the minority. There is certainly, I mean, a thing with the story wrapping up, you know, the first major saga, there is a sense of finality there, but even then, I don't see people just abandoning the game forever after final shape. Now is literally the best time to get back into Destiny. See, this is actually something I quite agree with, especially with the new Legacy Pack where they group all the expansions together and sell them for one price. And the final shape is adding so many new systems like Fire Team power and account-wide power. And overall, there's just so much stuff that actually makes this the best time you could possibly get into Destiny 2. There's so much stuff to help new players get caught up, help returning players get eased back into the game in a way that actually makes sense. So overall, like I said, I am optimistic for the future, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments and let me know what your overall thoughts on this video were. I thought it was really interesting and I'd love to hear what you think as well. Until next time, thank you for watching.